Xocoyotl rose before the first blue light edged the thatched rooftops of his quarter. In the hush of early Tenochtitlan, the scribe thumbed through the tribute ledger, its worn bark pages cradling the marks that would weigh countless lives before Emperor Moctezuma. On the 5th page for the month of Quetzalcoatlistli, the entry from Xocoyotl stared up at him. 200 baskets maize, 40 baskets cacao, the famed gold disc, weights notched in crimson. The handwriting was his own, but he reread the lines, careful in the waking silence, as he thought of how precise the calculations had to be, how the Colhuacan debacle of last year had resulted in public beatings. He paused over the penalty decrees codified with Moctezuma's glyph, enough to make cautious men sweat. Any loss or misrecording could mean shaved heads or worse. Monitors, porters, scribes, all lived under these parchments. He remembered his mentor, Xocoyotl, scolded fiercely just for a single peso gone astray. "We are the keepers of empire," the old man had muttered. But at what cost? Drawing the thin shawl across his shoulders, Xocoyotl slipped outside, ledger hugged against his chest. The city's avenues glimmered with dew, and as he crossed toward the long stone causeway, pinkening light played on Lake Texcoco's rippling face. By the time he reached the halfway mark above the shallow blue waters, the sun nudged above the horizon's line, casting his slender shadow ahead. Today, he would supervise the release and entry of the Xocoyotl tribute. So much depended on the gold disc, recorded with care into Tenochtitlan's hungry ledgers. As a solitary canoe drifted below, he braced himself for the morning's inspection. Nothing felt quite as predictable as custom claimed. When Xocoyotl arrived before the great tribute hall, morning had barely unfolded. The courtyard stones were slick from night's mist, shining pale underneath his sandaled feet. Usually, the precinct swelled with pre-dawn noise, offloading, haggling, laughter from the porters, the low calls of those tallying bales and fashioning marks onto reed counters. But today, silence pressed against the walls, broken only by the caw of a distant gull. He looked for his colleague, Tlilpotonqui, the ledger master with the uneven smile who always arrived just ahead of dawn. The usual spot beneath the eagle banner held only an arrangement of empty cane mats. No rattling of wooden counters, no brisk shuffle of scribes dusting ash across columns. Xocoyotl paced to the nearest alcove, stepping from shadow to banded sunlight. There, too, the stools stood vacant, the tally-painted gourds left dangling, swaying slightly as if someone had only just departed. He called out, softly at first, fearing to break the sacred quiet, more than necessary. "Tlilpotonqui?" His voice faded into the stonework. No reply echoed back. Moving deeper into the hall, Xocoyotl sniffed the faint scent wafting from the upper vents, burnt copal. Someone had performed a private offering before the tally, marking this day as momentous or ominous. The memory of Moctezuma's stern proclamations returned unwanted. Slipping through narrow aisles of baskets and woven crates, Xocoyotl's senses sharpened. The city was waking up, but here, the heart of the tribute system, all was still. Not even the mice ventured. He sat on his heels, setting the ledger beside his knee. It felt like the pause between two heartbeats, the moment when fate gathers in the lungs before speaking. Something was off. The tribute was not merely missing, its absence had rearranged the world's order. Keeping his movements silent, Xocoyotl crouched behind a stack of wide reed baskets, just as a whispered conversation punctured the stillness. He peered over the rim. Two porters, old hands with grey-streaked braids, huddled against the wall's shadow. Their voices floated in short, clipped bursts, "The baskets from Xocoyotl are lighter than air," one grumbled, placing his palm on a basket rim. "No maize. They came empty, all save the featherwork." He spat in the dust. His companion shook his head, a rattle of beads clinking at his neck. "And the gold disc, the governor's promise? No sign. I carried the weight of it last year. Now nothing. Only the list and a hush over every tongue." Xocoyotl held his breath. Xocoyotl's tribute was always well guarded, infamously so. The gold disc, in particular, was a totem, carved with the sun and rain, a symbol of the city's continued fealty. He thought of its sharp weight during last year's ceremony, how the emperor's grip had hovered over it. Then the first porter, with a nervous shudder, drew from his sash a small obsidian knife. He pressed the blade to his breast, crossing himself in the old way, whispering a jagged prayer for protection. "If the disc is lost," he said, "Moctezuma's wrath will chew us all raw." The second porter made the sign as well, voice low. "They say even the governor fears what happens now." Backing away before he was seen, Xocoyotl felt the chill creep up his arms. With no maize, and especially with no gold, things would turn swiftly, and not merely for those who whispered among the baskets. The day had begun with shadows, and trouble was already speaking through them. Xocoyotl felt the courtyard shudder before he saw the runner. The stone path trembled faintly as Tenoch stumbled in, legs caked nearly to the knee in dried mud and dust, jagged streaks crossing his shins where brambles had scraped him raw. The morning's blue light caught the bead of sweat clinging to his brow, his feathered cap askew, the telltale clay tablet bound at his waist smeared but intact. Xocoyotl stepped forward on instinct, calling the guards to stand aside. Tenoch's chest heaved, his lips moved, but only a rasp came out. "From Yohualan, the governor." The runner's hand shook as he thrust the tablet forward. Xocoyotl caught it before it could tumble from slick, shaking fingers. The seal pressed into the damp clay bore Yohualan's stylized reed and water circle, the city mark, but the imprint was crooked, as if stamped in great haste. Without ceremony, Xocoyotl pressed his thumbnail along the brittle crack line and broke it open. Rows of glyphs, hastily carved, unfurled beneath his eyes, the lines crowded and uneven in a hand he recognized as the governor's own. Most honored, noble ones, rain delayed the bearers, and further misfortune struck at Xochicotlan crossing. Xocoyotl read aloud, his own voice growing brittle. "Seek not blame but aid, for we are beset by men unknown. The tribute is endangered." Before he could finish, Tenoch's knees buckled. A soft moan left him as he sank by Xocoyotl's feet, armor rattling in the hush. Two guards rushed forward, but Tenoch's head lolled, eyes rolling back in exhaustion. The message fell silent in Xocoyotl's trembling hands, its meaning spreading faster through the courtyard than blood in water. The stone corridors leading to Moctezuma's audience hall seemed to narrow as Xocoyotl hurried through. Alongside him, tribute masters and record keepers murmured fretfully, their wooden tablets clacking. The air thickened with the musk of copal and human worry. By the time they reached the carved doors, the scribe could hear the urgency within. Voices layered, sharp and fast, like the swordgrass outside. A jaguar-mantled steward stood barring the final passage, his arms crossed and obsidian eyes fixed. "This is for the council only," he declared, but Xocoyotl raised the clay tablet aloft. "Message from Governor Yohualan. Urgent. Sealed," he said. The steward's gaze flicked downward. Then he relented, beckoning them forward with a twitch of his pawed cloak. Inside, The hall glinted with gold and featherwork. Moctezuma seated beneath the shimmering parasol of quetzal plumes, his stone visage unreadable. As the assembly knelt, Xocoyotl presented the still damp tablet to the head scribe, Tzok. The old man's joints popped as he bent to the glyphs. His voice, soft as a bell over a lake, recited Yohualan's plea for clemency and aid, each word weighing heavier than the last. A delay, governor's word, men unknown strike at the crossing, tribute endangered. The room stiffened. Moctezuma's treasury advisor, lips pinched white, snapped for a list of goods due. The tribute masters bowed, eyes flickering with dread. The emperor gave no sign, but the temperature in the chamber seemed to fall. Outside, a sudden shout echoed up the avenue, the city already catching the scent of crisis. No sooner had the scribe's voice faded than a ripple of accusation spread. Moctezuma's eyes lifted, gaze spearing Xocoyotl, then swept the kneeling tribute masters. Xocoyotl pleads hardship once more, he said quietly, yet every syllable fell like a thrown blade. When rivers run, tribute flows, unless something dams them. From his carpeted seat, Scribe Tzok cleared his throat. It is not the first waiver, revered speaker. In the cocoa season of 1497, records show Xocoyotl fell short. 2 sacks missing, excuse given. Forest spirits, he added, voice tinged with skepticism. A murmur ran along the mat-lined walls. Moctezuma's cousin, Ilhuicamina, tall and silver-browed, spoke from behind a fan of blue heron feathers. Perhaps this is no misfortune, but sabotage. Chalco sends hostile messengers lately. Their causeway is bandit-haunted. Could it be by design? The treasury master bristled, making swift notations on his cactus pulp scroll. Xocoyotl kept his eyes low, forcing pen to paper, cataloguing each vanished barrel and bead. Maize, absent. Honey, counted short by 3 jars last moon. Most damning, the gold disc, always the last item delivered to the emperor's hand, now uncertain. We cannot suffer laxity, Moctezuma intoned, knuckles taut on his obsidian throne. His stare pinned Yohualan's fate, and by extension, all present. Behind steepled fingers, Xocoyotl measured each tense silence, knowing these records would last longer than any one scapegoat's name. Above, incense burned, and the great jade disk of the ceiling seemed to glare. Xocoyotl's sandals slapped wet flagstones as he followed the tribute masters down narrow alleys toward Tenochtitlan's eastern lakefront. Dawn was just seeping between canals, and mist curled around the scuffed causeway like a veil. Canoe traffic here was usually relentless. This morning, the mooring posts held only a few empty skiffs and startled ducks. The harbour master's conch voice carried over ripple and oar. No tribute flotilla at first light, not a hull, not a runner's call. Boatmen clustered around heapings of bundled nets, sleepless and muttering. One, his jaw shadowed with lake mud, described a strange night fog rolling in before midnight. It moved too quick, stalked the shore, thick as lime paste. Couldn't see my own hand. Another nodded. After the fog, we saw canoes, not ours, too low and narrow. Chal can make like that. He raised a trembling finger northward, toward Chalco's far marshes. Their talk drew an anxious crowd of early fishers, mouths pinched with worry. Near a drift of crushed reeds, a shout rang out. A ragged child, legs slick with duckweed, waved a blackened stick. The tax insignia, faint but clear enough, had been gouged across the side, and the end was half charred. The tally for maize, Xocoyotl realized, dread rising. He took it from the girl's palms, his own fingers smudging soot and clay. "Left with the tide," a fisherman murmured, staring east. Xocoyotl, scribe's pouch heavy against his ribs, jotted the detail. Every small mark, the vanished tribute, the fog, the shapes in the dark. That was how the day would enter memory, if not yet in the official codex, at least on the banks where the city's pulse now hammered at the edge of worry. They carried Tenoch into the incense-fogged council chamber on a reed litter, his breath still ragged from dust and fear. Xocoyotl watched as two healers pressed pulque to the runner's cracked lips and wiped clay from his brow. Tenoch's tunic, usually sky blue, was slashed across the hem, crusted with lake mud, and a ribbon of dried blood tracing his shin. "Speak, Tenoch," the treasury master urged, quill poised for every word. He did, voice shaking but clear. He had set out from Xocoyotl at moonrise, guarding the governor's clay-sealed note. On the southern causeway, midway between island and mainland, a logjam of reeds halted him. Then, 4 masked men, faces concealed by knotted cloth, sprang from the shadows. Under the moon's glare, their obsidian blades flashed. Tenoch had darted for the marsh, slipping hard, taking a cut to his leg as he dived. Through cattails and mud, he crawled for hours until the city lights shivered at dawn. "They spoke Chalco's words," Tenoch whispered, "and their leader wore a feathered cuff, blood red." The chief scribe's stylus tapped quickly. "First tribute theft in a decade," he murmured to Xocoyotl, tone brittle. Tizoc, across the mats, pressed his lips thin. One of the council priests, voice pitched for memory, asked Tenoch how close he'd seen the tribute-laden canoes before vanishing. Tenoch shook his head. "I only heard shouting behind, curses. Something heavy splashed." Xocoyotl inked the runner's words with deliberate care, the trembling of Tenoch's hands mirroring his own tightly clasped wrist. All their fates balanced on that shattered night, when masked strangers turned the causeway's lifeblood into a question. It was midday before the final summons came. Palace drums rumbled like thunder over temple precincts, drawing Xocoyotl and the council back to Moctezuma's stone hall. The emperor's obsidian gaze, colder now, swept each kneeling subordinate. With a sword of polished flint resting across his knees, Moctezuma pronounced, "Let it be written. On the day one house, treachery cut the road, and our tribute vanished. My word. Search every dock, marsh, and hut. Let traitors be found and their homes razed. Chalco will answer for every missing shell and bead." The scribe appointed for judgments rose, bearing the crimson codex inks. Under Moctezuma's glare, Xocoyotl inscribed the Nahuatl glyph for one house, Tecali, arching it in red pigment across a jaguar skin folio. His finger smudged the mark, the crease of history settling into the page beside a record of vanished gold and honey. Out in the outer halls, palace guards hammered out a drum rhythm that echoed from market bridges to distant farming chinampas. Boatmen in straw hats paused in their labor, worry tightening their voices as the warning beat rolled west, the signal unmistakable. Search parties would swell by sundown, eyes sharp for any sign of betrayal. For a moment, Xocoyotl's senses narrowed to the basket of spoiling cacao left in the entry, its rich scent poignantly out of place beneath the heavy air of proclamation. He inked the day's last line, certain this moment, its dread and defiance, would outlast even the thickest codex block. The city held its breath, waiting for the verdicts to come. When the final dusk bell rang in the treasuries, Xocoyotl alone remained beneath the stone lintels, bench littered with splinters of red pigment and stalks of bruised maize leaf. The hall, bright with angry footfalls a short hour before, settled under the hush of evening, its woven reed doors drawn, the last light sliding along the polished floor mosaics. Outside, the terrace shadows stretched, painted purple by the descending sun over Lake Texcoco. He brought out the small, clay-sealed message from Governor Xocoyotl, rolling it once more between his palms. The script on the bark paper, hasty and slanted, had struck him during the earlier chaos. Mist cloaks the road, men in strange reeds. Delay is forced, not chosen. By the gods, seek patience. Simple words, yet now, in the silence, he searched every broken feather and crossed glyph, measuring for anything buried deeper. Did Xocoyotl warn of traitors among his own, or only beg pardon for what could not be helped? No cipher offered up its secret. Xocoyotl exhaled, folding the paper back along its seam, the governor's trembling final flourish catching the candlelight. At the main door, 2 guards closed the great lattice gates with a hollow thud, knocking poles into their bronze footings. Their faces, hard with duty, flicked towards Xocoyotl and then away, silent men, sworn to speak nothing of the gold and honey missing from tonight's tally. The hall's emptiness pressed close on all sides, pricking at memories of other tribute days, when laughter and quarrels overcharged the air and cacao dust marked the start of another year of abundance. Shouldering his basket, Xocoyotl stepped from the threshold. From across the water, drums still beat, steady, insistent. He wondered what news would drift with dawn, and whether Tenochtitlan's greatness had shifted by even a single shadow's length this fateful day.